On this Tuesday night, the growing cost of groceries. As food prices climb, a new report finds a small number of large companies taking a bite out of the competition.
Grocers are in a cozy environment.
Getting acclimatized with climate change.
There's no magic wand.
A new plan to protect Canadians from extreme weather and wildfires. Damning new evidence against Donald Trump.
These are the greatest.
The tape that could take down the former U.S. president. Plus, looking for life in space. For the first time, a NASA telescope spots a critical compound.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We begin with some good news and some bad news when it comes to the cost of living in this country. First, the good. There are signs the affordability crisis is easing. Canada's inflation rate slowed to 3.4% last month. That's the lowest level in almost 2 years, driven by a big drop in gas prices. But other costs are still rising. Housing, for example. The amount of interest Canadians owe on their mortgages is climbing at a record pace, up nearly 30% over last year. And many economists expect the Bank of Canada will hike rates again next month. While grocery prices, compared to a year ago, are up 9%. That growing grocery bill is being blamed in part on a lack of competition. A highly anticipated report from Canada's Competition Bureau describes a massive industry that's dominated by a handful of players. The months-long study found most Canadians shop at grocery stores owned by Loblaws, Sobeys and Metro. Those three chains pulled in a combined profit of $3.6 billion last year. The report says more competition is needed to keep grocery prices in check. Mike Drolet has our top story.
As food prices outpaced inflation last year, Canadians demanded action. But when the country's competition watchdog launched an investigation, Canada's grocery giants, it says, weren't exactly cooperative.
Shocker. I mean, that's the problem. I mean, that is the problem. That is the big elephant in the room. How do we actually get to a more authoritative, more forceful bureau?
The report found what most Canadians already know, that the grocery business is controlled by the few. In fact, when the Competition Act was introduced in 1986, there were 8 chains in Canada. 5 of those were eventually gobbled up by the big 3. Today, with Walmart and Costco in the picture, there are 5 chains. But while those 2 newcomers operate 500 stores, the big 3 of Loblaws, Sobeys and Metro combined have 4,850 stores.
When I talk to friends and they say, oh, I went to an independent grocer today. And I say, oh, who is that? And they'll say, you're an independent grocer. And I explain to them, that's a Loblaws franchise. It might say you're independent grocer. It's not an independent grocer. It's a chain.
What most Canadians likely don't know is that the 2 main food wholesalers in the country are owned by Loblaws and Sobeys, leaving the 6,900 actual independent grocery stores no option but to buy their stock from their competition.
If you're a Sobeys wholesaler, who comes first, Sobeys or your independent customers? You don't have to be a business major to know that obviously they're going to look after themselves first.
The report made broad recommendations around business models to improve competition, but industry insiders say they're too vague to make an immediate difference. Where the report will help, they say, is in the creation of a grocery code, which is currently being written.
The code of conduct will bring an end to bullying, but it will also increase competition as a result as well. It will protect independent grocers. We will be able to keep small retailers.
Will the large chains voluntarily sign on to the code after it's completed? Unlike the independents, they have a lot to lose. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
Well, after more than 2 years of planning and consultation, the federal government unveiled Canada's first national adaptation strategy.
While we must reduce our emissions to keep the climate from getting worse, we must also make our communities more resilient to the impacts of climate change. This is a whole-of-society plan to reduce the risk and prepare communities for climate impacts.
Ottawa plans to spend more than $1.5 billion over the next 5 years to better protect against extreme weather events, such as major storms and wildfires. Provinces and municipalities are also expected to contribute. The strategy includes plans to rethink everything from building materials to the way we manage our forests. David Akin has the details.
Wildfires, floods, drought. Extreme weather events across the country have brought governments at all levels together to forge a new national adaptation strategy to help communities prepare for the inevitable effects of rapid climate change.
There's no solution that is going to either solve mitigation or adaptation issues overnight. What we're presenting today is a collective action plan.
Ottawa will help with funding. For example, it will foot the $163 million bill for a new national flood hazard identification map. That will be a crucial planning tool for local authorities. But critics say more money is needed.
Honestly, I found today's announcement underwhelming and disappointing. They announced their adaptation strategy last year with $1.6 billion, but we were expecting additional funding.
Still, there are non-monetary measures in the strategy, such as overhauling the national building codes and the highway and bridge design code. All agree on the value of smarter land use plans and better ways to manage forests. In the Northwest Territories, for example, 29 communities have completed plans to build fire breaks. Soon, they'll be ready to put those plans into action.
That's going to be much bigger dollars than we've ever seen.
Both the cost and the amount of work to be done on adaptation can be overwhelming. The decay of permafrost in the Northwest Territories is a $1.3 billion problem, far beyond the capacity of the territorial government.
It'll be catastrophic failures of assets, potentially loss of life. And if we don't do it as in a proactive manner, it's going to cost so much more.
Indeed, federal government experts say that for every dollar spent on prevention, on adaptation, means saving $15 in costs, the cost of cleaning up from the effects of climate change. Jeff.
David Akin in Ottawa. Thanks, David. That National Climate Adaptation Plan comes in the midst of what is now Canada's worst wildfire season on record. 7.7 million hectares of forest have burned in Canada this year, with 6 months still to go. Climate scientists predict this unprecedented wildfire season will become the new normal, meaning those living in and around Canada's vast forests need to be prepared. Heather Yourex-West traveled to one Alberta community that's already taking action.
Surrounded by forest, residents of Banff, Alberta spend hot summer days on edge.
It's distressing. I mean, the minute you start smelling smoke in the air, you just your animal instinct takes over.
When Parks Canada lost control of a prescribed burn in early May, fire came dangerously close to the community. Hundreds of people were forced from their homes. Now, in strong winds, an ember from a wildfire can travel up to 8 kilometers. That means any property in a forest-adjacent community is at risk of going up in flames.
So the sprinkler program is aimed at that. We can try and get water onto the roofs of these structures or in the areas around these structures. And when those embers come in, that it's already wet.
Part of a 3-year pilot project, the town of Banff is offering subsidized sprinkler kits to homeowners who sign up for a Fire Smart inspection. Created in Alberta back in the 90s, Fire Smart programs now operate in every province and territory, helping property owners protect their homes from wildfires.
There is a lot of evidence, both from the US and here, that shows that Fire Smart at the community level and at property level can be very effective in terms of reducing house loss and damage to communities.
But in the face of intensifying seasons, Fire Smart needs to be scaled up significantly and fast. Under current funding and operation models, the Fire Smart Alberta program has only managed to reach 40 communities province-wide.
Quite often, the education and engagement falls into the hands and the responsibility of our paid-on-call volunteer fire departments, and so capacity is a tremendous barrier for that.
Fire Smart officials agree they need more support, so that all those who crave the tranquility of these timbers are ready for the danger ahead. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Banff.
A big win for animal rights advocates in this country. The federal government is banning all animal testing for cosmetic products.
Companies will no longer be able to sell cosmetics that rely on animal testing data to establish product safety, and it is now prohibited to create false or misleading statements concerning the testing of cosmetics on animals.
The ban takes effect this December by amending the Food and Drug Act. The move brings Canada in line with 43 other countries that have already imposed similar measures, including the UK, Australia, and the EU. New evidence has emerged in the U.S. federal case against Donald Trump, accused of keeping and mishandling classified documents. Despite Trump's previous denials, a leaked audio recording now appears to capture a moment when the former president was holding a secret document.
Isn't that amazing? This totally wins my case, you know. Except it is like highly confidential, secret. This is secret information.
In the 2021 recording obtained by CNN, Trump allegedly discusses the confidential files with his staffers as well as a writer and publisher. At one point, the conversation sounds like he's showing them a secret Pentagon document containing a plan of attack against Iran.
I think the evidence could be used against the former president to show both that he was careless with secret classified information. It could be shown to illustrate or to prove his knowledge that this information remained classified and it could not be shared publicly.
Trump was federally indicted earlier this month on 37 counts relating to the documents. He's pleaded not guilty to all charges. If convicted, he could face years in prison. In Ukraine, at least 2 people were killed when Russian missiles pounded a city on the eastern front line. 22 others were hurt, including a child. There are concerns more people are pinned under that debris. The attack targeted a restaurant and a busy shopping area in the city center. A major rescue operation is now underway. The president of Belarus is claiming the leader of the mercenary Wagner group has arrived in his country. Alexander Lukashenko, a loyal ally of Russian President Putin, offered refuge to Yevgeny Prigozhin after brokering a deal to stop Saturday's Russian rebellion. It's unclear what will happen to Prigozhin after he spearheaded one of the greatest challenges to Putin's grip on power. As Jackson Prosko reports, Putin is reasserting his authority.
Undoubtedly weakened by the failed mutiny, Vladimir Putin tried to project strength from the steps of the Kremlin. You saved our motherland from the turmoil, he told a crowd of his security forces. In fact, you stopped a civil war, he said. The man who orchestrated the armed rebellion, Yevgeny Prigozhin, has been banished to Belarus, where he may well avoid formal prosecution. His Wagner mercenary fighters have been given a choice: join the Russian army or join their leader in exile. They're supposed to turn in their weapons along the way. In Minsk, Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko claimed to have brokered the deal. In a nationally televised address, he offered rare criticism of Putin's response to the insurrection. If Russia falls, we will be buried under the wreckage, he warned.
That's really telling that Vladimir Putin not only seemed paralyzed for the first about 15 hours of this mutiny or coup, but then also didn't play a critical role in resolving it himself.
Yet if Prigozhin's goal was to shake up Russia's military command over the faltering war in Ukraine, he seems to have failed. Russia's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, was still apparently in his job Tuesday, despite calls for his ouster.
My strong sense is that we're really only seeing the first act of this process.
Whether the stage is Moscow and new threats to Putin's leadership, or Ukraine, is as yet unknown. Russian turmoil could be the opening Kyiv has been looking for as it mounts its counteroffensive. The Kremlin insists it will not be deterred from its goals, even as cracks appear in its armor. Jackson Prosko, Global News, Washington.
And new data from the United Nations is revealing the scale of Russia's brutality in Ukraine. The UN monitoring mission interviewed more than 1,100 people. Investigators found more than 900 cases of civilians being arbitrarily detained, including children and seniors. The vast majority of those prisoners said they were tortured and in some cases sexually abused. The UN also documented the execution of at least 77 civilians in captivity. On the other side, the report found Ukraine had arbitrarily detained at least 75 people, with more than half reporting torture or mistreatment. Torontonians have chosen their next mayor. Coming up, Olivia Chow's remarkable comeback and historic victory. Plus, the disastrous deja vu at this apartment complex.
Thank you to the people of Toronto for the trust you've placed in me and the mandate for change as your new mayor.
Olivia Chow will be the next mayor of Canada's largest city. Her victory speech focused on affordability, vowing to bring change to a city she says has endured a decade of neglect. Chao also vowed to work with Ontario's Conservative Premier, Doug Ford, who openly endorsed and supported another candidate. It's a political comeback of sorts for the former NDP MP. She ran unsuccessfully for that job a decade ago. Chao is now the first woman of color to lead the city, and her win represents an end to more than a decade of centre-right leadership. Eric Sorensen now on the challenges facing Toronto's next mayor.
Answering a question in Cantonese has to be a first. The first Chinese-Canadian mayor in Canada's largest city. A remarkable resurrection for Olivia Chow after leaving politics almost 10 years ago when she lost the mayor's race and following the death of her husband, NDP leader Jack Layton. A comeback for her and for progressives at Toronto City Hall, promising affordable housing, better and safer public transit, and even higher taxes to pay for it.
The people have sent a message today. They want to get things done.
A message of more investment, less austerity, says this professor.
Toronto is an amazing city, but it's been decaying. And if we're not willing to raise the revenue that we need to support the city, it's going to continue to decay.
Olivia Chow comes to Toronto City Hall with a clear victory over Anna Bailão, who made it close in part with an endorsement from previous mayor John Tory. But the other main challenger, former police chief Mark Saunders, wound up with barely 8%. After Premier Doug Ford gave him a late endorsement.
Is that a rejection of you?
Well, I knew you were going to ask me this one.
The result was awkward for Ontario's Premier, who said this just a few days ago.
If Olivia Chow gets in, it'll be unmitigated disaster.
A different tone now.
During the election, you throw some mud back and forth, but I'll tell you one thing. People expect us to work together, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
The new mayor agrees there's common ground on issues like housing.
I can absolutely work with Premier Doug Ford.
But sharp differences exist over private investment at Ontario Place and addressing the city's billion-dollar deficit.
You got to get your fiscal house in order.
Chao wants to partner with the province and Ottawa.
Because at the end of the day, a healthy and livable city of Toronto means a strong Canada.
Toronto's last progressive mayor says Chao can marshal support from other mayors to bring change, but even more historic, electing an immigrant woman.
It's not just that she's progressive. I think she's symbolic of what Toronto is today. We're a diverse, welcoming city where newcomers can succeed, and I think that's a very good thing.
The Premier is giving new powers to Ontario mayors to override the majority on council, but Chao says she won't take them.
I believe in democracy.
She'll stick with the old way, one person, one vote. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
A discovery that's out of this world. Still ahead with the James Webb Telescope spotted in space. A large fire broke out at an apartment building in the United Arab Emirates early this morning. A tower of flames shooting up the side of the 36-story residential high-rise. No injuries were reported. A large fire tore through two towers in that same complex in 2016. Devastating flash floods and landslides struck southern China today, leaving at least 4 people dead and several others missing. The slides forced more than 900 people to flee their homes. Officials say hundreds of rescuers are taking part in the search for at least 3 people who are still missing. Astronomers have detected a critical new carbon compound in space for the first time. The James Webb Telescope traced it to a young star system about 1,300 light-years away. The compound aids the formation of more complex carbon-based molecules that are the foundation of all known forms of life. The discovery could help scientists understand how life developed on Earth and how it could possibly develop in other places. And that is Global National for this Tuesday night. I'm Jeff Semple. Tonight's Your Canada is this old grain elevator in Fannystown, Manitoba. Thanks for watching. Eric Sorensen will be at the anchor desk with you tomorrow, and I'll see you again on Thursday. Have a great night.